My name is Daphne Miller, and I am 22 years old. 10 days before Thanksgiving, my mom called. It was a freezing Tuesday. I was on my couch eating frozen lasagna, the radiator clanking loudly, and the caller ID said Mom, so I picked up mid-bite. 5 words. That is all it took. Pack your apartment by the 25th. I set my plastic fork down, wiped my mouth with a paper towel, said nothing for maybe 6 seconds, which does not sound long until you are the one doing the math. Brandon needs a new Ford truck, she said. Your brother. Brandon, the golden child, and apparently still the center of every financial decision my parents make, even my lease. The car payment is too high, Daphne. He needs to save money. I paid my rent on time, but my safety was traded for his vanity. 2 minutes later, my dad got on the phone to finish the job. Rent a cheap Motel 6, don't make a scene. He said it like he was reading a corporate memo. 10 days later, my parents would raise their crystal glasses at dinner, completely unaware that the daughter they threw out into the snow was now their landlord. This is a place where we share real stories about family, boundaries, and the people who show up when it matters most. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me go ahead and tell you how this actually happened. I grew up in Oak Creek, Illinois. Brick houses, driveway basketball hoops, and snow shovels leaning against the porches by October. The kind of town where people judge you by how neat your front lawn is. Brandon was the star, quarterback for the high school team. Loud laugh, always wearing a blue varsity jacket. My mom kept his 4 sports trophies on the living room mantel, right above the fireplace. She wiped the dust off them every Sunday morning with a yellow microfiber cloth. My dad introduced him to the neighbors the same way every time. Here is the future CEO, he would say, clapping Brandon on the back. I was the quiet one. I spent my time in the unfinished basement fixing broken electronics. I bought a fried Dell laptop at a yard sale for $15 when I was 16. I ordered a cheap motherboard, watched online videos, and got it running again. I used it to build a small website for a local bakery. When I walked upstairs to show my mom the screen, she was watching a college football game. She didn't look away from the TV. That's nice, honey. Move over, your brother is about to get the ball. She said it without blinking. That laptop stayed on my basement desk for 5 years. I replaced the battery twice. My dad never asked what I did on it. My high school graduation landed on a Tuesday in June. That same week, Brandon announced he got a $5,000 loan from our parents to start a custom t-shirt business. My parents decided to take us to Applebee's to celebrate. My dad ordered a pitcher of Coors Light and spent 40 minutes talking about Brandon's business plan. My mom smiled and told the waitress her son was an entrepreneur. I ate my chicken tenders and clapped when my dad raised his glass to Brandon. Nobody mentioned my diploma. I had graduated with a 3.7 GPA and an acceptance to the community college for an accounting certification. I paid my own $40 application fee from the money I made bagging groceries at the local supermarket. When I finally told my dad about the accounting program, he put down his newspaper and shook his head. Nobody gets rich doing other people's math, he said. Just 8 words. He never asked about my classes again. Brandon's t-shirt business went bankrupt in 6 months. My parents quietly paid off his remaining $3,400 credit card debt. They never brought it up at dinner. My community college tuition was $2,100 a semester. I paid it myself by working night shifts at a Walgreens on 4th Street. I stood at the register from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., scanning cough syrup and energy drinks under bright fluorescent lights. Nobody announced my work ethic to the neighbors. Brandon got a job in regional sales for a beverage company 3 years later. He bought a fake gold watch and talked endlessly about his commissions, but he still moved back into our parents' house 3 different times before he turned 26. Every time he needed money, he used the exact same trick. He would pack his duffel bags and say he was moving to a dangerous neighborhood in the city because he couldn't afford rent anywhere else. My mom would panic. My dad would pull out his checkbook. You can't let him live in a bad place, my mom would say, her voice shaking. He is just finding his footing. He was 26 years old. That was the family rule. Brandon's comfort always came first. I moved out when I was 20. I rented a 2nd-floor apartment in a 2-family house owned by my parents. It was a drafty place on Elm Street with peeling wallpaper. I paid them $850 a month for rent. I paid on time, every single month, using direct deposit. I painted the living room walls eggshell white, fixed the leaky kitchen sink myself with a wrench and some plumber's tape, and put weather strips on the windows to keep the freezing Chicago winter out. It was small, but it was mine. I started spending my Sunday afternoons with my great-aunt Clara. She lived in a single-story brick house across town. Her sister, my grandmother, had passed away from lung cancer 5 years ago. Clara was 78. She drank black Lipton tea from a chipped ceramic mug. She had bad arthritis, so her knuckles were always swollen and red. I showed up on a Sunday in October to help her organize her messy tax folders. She watched me sort the papers on her kitchen table. Then she slid a plate of store-bought sugar cookies toward me. "You work too hard for people who don't even look at you," she said. She didn't say it with pity, she just stated it like a simple fact. It was the first time anyone in my family had ever really seen me. I stopped stacking the 1099 forms and looked down at my hands. The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of Clara's old refrigerator. I didn't argue with her. I just picked up my $12 plastic calculator, punched in the numbers from her property tax bill, and wrote the final amount on a yellow sticky note. "I'm fine, Aunt Clara," I said. She took another slow sip of her black tea. "Being fine is just surviving," she replied. She reached across the table with her stiff, swollen fingers and tapped the sticky note. "You have a good head for this. Don't let them make you feel small just because you aren't loud." 2 weeks later, on a chilly Tuesday morning, I got my first real break. I received an email at 9:15 a.m. offering me a full-time position as a junior payroll clerk at a local roofing company. The salary was $41,500 a year. It wasn't a fortune, but it meant I could finally quit the night shifts at Walgreens. I drove straight to the thrift store on 9th Avenue and bought a heavy wool winter coat for $22.50 to celebrate. I wanted to tell my parents. I thought a real office job might finally make my dad nod at me the way he nodded at Brandon. At 6:30 p.m. that evening, I drove to their house to drop off my $850 rent check for the second-floor apartment. When I walked through the front door, I smelled roasted garlic and meatloaf. My mom was standing by the stove. My dad was sitting in his recliner with the evening news playing, and Brandon was sitting at the kitchen island eating a massive slice of meatloaf. He was talking loudly with his mouth half full. "I just can't pull up to a client meeting in a rusty 2012 Honda Civic, Mom," Brandon complained, waving his fork. "It makes me look totally broke. The regional manager told me image is everything in this business. I need a truck, a brand new Ford F-150, black on black. Something that shows people I am a closer." My dad muted the television and leaned forward. "He's right, Susan. In sales, people judge you by what you drive before you even shake their hand." I stood in the hallway holding my rent check. Nobody had noticed me walk in yet. "But honey," my mom said, wiping the granite counter with a sponge, "those new trucks are expensive. Can you afford that on your base salary?" Brandon pushed his empty plate away and sighed heavily, rubbing his face like a man carrying the weight of the world. "The monthly payment is $680. Plus insurance. I can't swing that with my current rent downtown. It's impossible. If I don't get this truck, I'm going to lose out on the big corporate accounts. My whole career is going to stall out." He didn't offer to get a second job. He didn't offer to buy a cheaper used car. He just sat there, waiting for them to fix it. My mom stopped wiping the counter. She didn't say anything. She just slowly turned her head and looked over at my dad. It was a quiet, terrifying look. It was the kind of silent conversation parents have when they are calculating a solution that requires a sacrifice. I stepped fully into the kitchen and set my check on the edge of the island. "Here is the rent for November," I said. Brandon jumped a little. My mom quickly looked away from my dad and started wiping the counter again, scrubbing a spot that was already clean. "Oh, hi, honey," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. "We didn't hear you come in. How was work?" "I actually got a new job today," I said. "A junior payroll clerk at Miller Roofing, full-time." My dad picked up the television remote. "That's nice. Make sure you don't mess up their paychecks. People get angry about that." He unmuted the TV. He didn't ask how much I was making. He didn't say congratulations. Brandon picked up my rent check, looked at the $850 written on it, and smirked. "Payroll clerk, huh? Sounds boring. But hey, it pays the bills, right?" He flicked the check back onto the counter. I didn't stay for dinner. I walked back out into the freezing November wind, pulled my $22 thrift store coat tight around my chest, and drove home to my drafty apartment. The next Sunday, I was back at Aunt Clara's house. I was standing on a step stool in her pantry, organizing her canned soups so the oldest dates were in the front. I told her about the meatloaf dinner. I told her about the Ford truck. Clara was sitting at her small kitchen table, peeling a green apple with a paring knife. She stopped peeling. The long strip of green skin fell onto her plate. She looked out her frosty kitchen window for a long time, her jaw tight. "Your mother stopped wiping the counter, you said?" Clara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Yes," I answered, stepping down from the stool. Clara set the knife down. "Start packing up your winter clothes," she said flatly. I looked at her, confused. "Why? I just paid rent." "Because they aren't looking for a way to pay for his truck, child," Clara said, her eyes locking onto mine. "They are looking for a way to eliminate his rent. And you are holding the cheapest lease in the family." I stared at Clara's wrinkled hands. "They can't do that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I pay on time. I have a month-to-month lease." Clara scraped the apple peels into the garbage bin under the sink. "A lease from your parents is just a piece of paper, Daphne. They don't see you as a tenant. They see you as a backup plan for him." I drove back to my apartment that afternoon, trying to convince myself Clara was just being an old, cynical woman. My parents favored Brandon, yes. But they wouldn't kick me out into the Chicago winter. That was crazy. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Tuesday evening, exactly 10 days before Thanksgiving. It was 7:15 p.m. The radiator in my living room was making that loud clanking noise it always made when the temperature dropped below freezing. I was sitting on my second-hand couch, wrapped in a gray fleece blanket, eating a $4 frozen lasagna from a plastic tray. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. "Mom," flashed on the screen. I wiped my mouth with a paper towel and answered. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, honey," she said. Her voice was tight. It was the exact same tone she used when she called to cancel my dentist appointments when I was a kid because Brandon had a sudden football practice. "Listen, your dad and I have been crunching some numbers for your brother. He really needs this truck to land those big corporate accounts." I stopped chewing. The plastic tray suddenly felt very cold against my lap. "Okay," I said slowly. "The only way he can afford the insurance and the $680 car payment is if he cuts his living expenses to zero," she continued, speaking very fast now. She wanted to get the words out before I could interrupt. "So, we need you to pack your second-floor apartment by November 25th. We're giving your lease to Brandon so he can save up for his new Ford truck." The radiator clanked again. It sounded like a hammer hitting a pipe. "Mom," I breathed out. "It's freezing outside. Where am I supposed to go in 10 days? There was a brief shuffling sound on the phone. She had put me on speaker. My dad's voice came through, loud and completely detached. "You just got that new payroll job, so you have an income," my dad said. He sounded like he was reading from a business memo. "Just rent a Motel 6 on the outskirts of Chicago for now. They do cheap weekly rates. Don't make a scene and ruin our holiday dinner. We have the neighbors coming over this year." A Motel 6, on the outskirts of the city, because Brandon needed to look rich in a black-on-black Ford F-150. "Dad, I can't live in a motel. All my stuff. You can rent a U-Haul storage unit for $50. He cut me off. "Brandon is bringing moving boxes over on Saturday. Have your kitchen packed by then." The line went dead. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't ask if I was scared. They just hung up. I sat on the couch in the quiet room. I looked down at the half-eaten lasagna. The cheese had hardened into a cold, stiff sheet. I walked over to the living room window and pulled back the cheap plastic blinds. Outside, heavy snow was starting to fall under the yellow glow of the streetlights. The wind was whipping the branches of the elm tree against the side of the house. I pressed my forehead against the freezing glass. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone against the wall. I just felt a deep, hollow pit open up in my stomach. I had paid them rent for 2 years. I had fixed their plumbing. I had painted their walls. And they traded my home for a set of truck tires without even flinching. I spent the next 3 hours on my laptop, searching for cheap apartments online. Every landlord wanted first month's rent, last month's rent, and a $1,000 security deposit. I only had $1,400 in my savings account. My new payroll job didn't issue the first paycheck until the end of the month. The math didn't work. Dad was right. A cheap motel by the highway was my only option. At 11:30 p.m., I finally closed my laptop. I pulled out a cardboard box from the hall closet and started taking my books off the shelf. My phone buzzed again. It was a text message. Not from my mom, not from my dad. It was from Aunt Clara. "Come to my house tomorrow after your work shift. Bring your tax documents. We have paperwork to do." I parked in Aunt Clara's cracked concrete driveway at 5:45 p.m. the next evening. The sky was already dark, and the air smelled like wet asphalt and snow. I carried a thin manila envelope with my W-2s, my 2 recent pay stubs, and my bank statements. I assumed Clara wanted to look at my finances to help me co-sign a lease for a new apartment. When I walked through her front door, the house smelled like peppermint oil and old paper. Clara was sitting at her heavy oak dining table. She wasn't drinking tea today. She had a thick stack of papers in front of her, held together by a heavy black binder clip. A brass desk lamp cast a bright circle of light onto the documents. "Sit," she said, pointing to the wooden chair across from her. I sat down and placed my thin envelope on the table. I brought my tax forms, I said. But Aunt Clara, I looked online today. Even with my new job, the deposit for a decent one-bedroom is $1,800. I don't have enough. I really think I just have to pack my boxes and go to the motel. Clara didn't look at my envelope. She pushed it to the side. Then she slid her thick stack of papers into the center of the light. You aren't moving to a motel, Daphne, she said. Her voice was rough, like sandpaper. She rubbed her swollen knuckles. Do you know what happened to your parents in 2018? I frowned. No. I was in high school. Dad was working at the insurance firm. He was, Clara said, her eyes narrowing. But he also took out a second mortgage on their house to invest in a friend's restaurant business. The business failed in 8 months. The bank sent a foreclosure notice. I felt my heart beat a little faster. They never told me that. Of course they didn't, Clara said dryly. They only talk about success. They never talk about their failures. She pulled a silver pen from her pocket and clicked it. Your grandmother, my sister, was still alive back then. She begged me to help them so they wouldn't end up on the street. So, I went to the bank. I paid off the $115,400 they owed. I stared at her. Aunt Clara lived in a small house. She wore the same gray cardigan every winter. I had no idea she had that kind of money. When I paid off the bank, Clara continued, tapping the pen against the table, I didn't just give them a loan. I bought the deed to their house. And I bought the deed to the 2-family rental property on Elm Street where you live right now. The room went completely silent. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. They don't own the houses? I asked. My voice shook. I let them keep their names on the utility bills, Clara said flatly. I let them manage the rental. I told them as long as they paid the property taxes and took care of the family, I would leave the properties to them in my will. They think I am just a tired old woman who forgot about the paperwork. Clara suddenly coughed. It was a deep, wet cough that rattled in her chest. She grabbed a tissue from her pocket and pressed it to her mouth. When she pulled it away, she took a long, slow breath, closing her eyes. Aunt Clara, are you okay? I started to stand up. She held up her hand to stop me. Sit down, she ordered gently. I went to the doctor on Monday. The cancer is back. It's in my liver this time. Stage 4. They gave me 4 months. The air left my lungs. I gripped the edges of my wooden chair. No, we can find another doctor. We can— Daphne, listen to me, Clara interrupted. Her voice wasn't sad, it was fierce. I am 78 years old. I have made my peace, but I am not going to leave this earth and watch those people throw you out into the snow so that boy can drive a shiny truck. She turned the thick stack of papers around so they faced me. At the top, in bold black letters, it said, Cook County Quitclaim Deed. I spent the morning with my lawyer, Clara said. I am breaking the trust. I am transferring the deed to their house, and the deed to your apartment building, entirely into your name, effective immediately. I looked down at the paper. My name was typed on the dotted line, Daphne Miller, sole owner. Aunt Clara, I can't take this, I whispered. My hands felt numb. Dad will go crazy. Mom will never forgive me. They evicted you 10 days before Thanksgiving, Clara said, her gray eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. They traded your safety for his vanity. They broke the family contract, not you. She slid the silver pen across the smooth wood. It stopped right in front of my hand. Sign the papers, Daphne, she said softly. Stop being the quiet girl in the basement. It is time to turn the lights on. I stared at the silver pen resting on the dark oak wood. I reached out and picked it up. The metal was cold against my fingers. I looked at Aunt Clara. She wasn't smiling, she was just waiting. I pressed the tip of the pen against the thick paper and signed my name on the dotted line. Daphne Miller. I signed the second page, and then the third. When I finished, Clara took the pen from my hand. She neatly stacked the papers and clamped the heavy black binder clip back on top. My lawyer, Mr. Higgins, is taking these to the Cook County Clerk's office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Clara said, opening a desk drawer and sliding the papers inside. By Friday, both properties will be legally recorded in your name. They will belong to you. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were shaking. What do I do now? I asked. Clara leaned back in her wooden chair. You go home. You let Brandon bring the moving boxes on Saturday. You pack your dishes. You play the part of the quiet, obedient daughter one last time. Let them think they won. And on Thanksgiving, you bring the deed to dinner. I left her house at 8 p.m. I drove back to my drafty apartment on Elm Street. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't heat up the rest of the frozen lasagna. I just walked around the small living room, touching the eggshell white walls I had painted. This was my house now, not my parents' rental property, mine. Saturday morning arrived with heavy gray clouds and freezing rain. At 10:15 a.m., I heard heavy footsteps on the wooden stairs outside my apartment door. Someone pounded on the door 3 times. I opened it. Brandon was standing on the landing, wearing his thick blue varsity jacket from high school. He was holding a stack of flat, brown cardboard boxes. He pushed past me without saying hello and dropped the boxes onto my living room floor. They hit the wood with a loud smack. Home Depot was completely sold out of the medium boxes, so I only brought large ones, Brandon complained, shaking the rain out of his hair. You should probably start with the kitchen. Mom wants to come over on Tuesday to clean the carpets before I move my stuff in. I looked at the stack of cardboard. Tuesday? I asked quietly. My lease isn't up until the 25th. Brandon rolled his eyes and sighed. Come on, Daff, don't be difficult. The Ford dealership called me yesterday. They have the black F-150 on the lot right now. If I don't sign the financing paperwork by Wednesday, they are going to sell it to someone else. I need to show them my new address so my debt-to-income ratio looks better. He walked into my kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and pulled out a bottle of my orange juice. He unscrewed the cap and drank right from the bottle. Did you find a motel yet? He asked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I stood in the doorway watching him. My heart was beating fast, but my voice stayed completely level. Yes, I lied. I found a place near the highway. Cool, he said, setting the half-empty juice bottle on the counter. Hey, I'm meeting some guys from the office at a sports bar downtown. Have these boxes packed by Monday. He walked out the front door and let it slam shut behind him. He didn't offer to help me tape the boxes. He didn't ask if I needed money for the motel deposit. He just drank my juice and left. I spent the weekend doing exactly what Clara told me to do. I bought a roll of clear packing tape. I assembled the large cardboard boxes. I wrapped my cheap ceramic plates in newspaper and placed them inside. Every time I taped a box shut, I felt a strange sense of calm. They thought I was packing to leave, but I was really just cleaning my own house. Wednesday evening, the day before Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed. I was sitting on the floor, eating a bowl of canned soup. It was Mom. Hi, honey, she said cheerfully. Just calling to make sure you have everything ready for tomorrow. Dinner is exactly at 4 p.m. Don't be late. The Henderson family is coming over, and your dad wants everything to look perfect. I'll be there, I said. And Daphne, she added, her voice dropping to a serious whisper. Please wear that nice gray sweater I bought you for Christmas last year. We don't want the Hendersons thinking you are struggling. And remember what your dad said, no making a scene about the apartment. This is a happy day for your brother. We need to support his career. I looked at the brown boxes stacked in the corner of my living room. Then I looked at the thick manila folder sitting on my coffee table. Mr. Higgins had dropped it off in my mailbox that afternoon. It contained the official, county-stamped copies of the property deeds. I won't ruin the dinner, Mom, I said smoothly. I promise. I have a surprise for everyone. Oh good, she said, sounding relieved. Maybe you can bring some store-bought dinner rolls. See you tomorrow. She hung up. I put my phone down. I opened the manila folder and ran my finger over the raised county seal on the paper. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving, and I was going to serve them exactly what they asked for. Thanksgiving morning was freezing. The sky over Chicago was the color of dirty concrete, and a thin layer of ice covered my apartment windows. I woke up at 8 a.m., but I didn't get out of bed right away. I just lay there under my thin quilt, looking at the stack of brown Home Depot boxes against the wall. They were taped shut, full of my plates, my winter boots, and my books. At 2 p.m., I finally got up to shower. I dried my hair and pulled on the gray wool sweater my mom had specifically asked me to wear. It was itchy around the collar, but I put it on anyway. I wanted to give her exactly the version of me she expected. The quiet, obedient daughter who didn't cause problems. I grabbed a plain manila folder from my desk and slid the thick, county-stamped deeds inside. I folded it in half and tucked it into my black leather purse. On the way to my parents' house, I stopped at a corner gas station and bought a plastic bag of Hawaiian sweet rolls for $4.99. I pulled onto my parents' street in Oak Creek at exactly 3:55 p.m. Their front lawn was perfectly edged, even in the snow. Brandon's rusty 2012 Honda Civic was parked diagonally across the driveway, taking up 2 spaces. I had to park my car half a block down the street, right next to a fire hydrant. I walked up the concrete driveway, my boots crunching on the rock salt my dad had sprinkled that morning. Before I even opened the front door, I could hear the loud booming laugh of Mr. Henderson, my dad's boss from the insurance firm. I turned the brass knob and walked inside. The house smelled like butter, sage stuffing, and expensive pine candles. The heat was turned up so high my glasses immediately fogged. I took off my boots in the mudroom and walked into the living room. It looked like a picture from a magazine. My dad was standing by the fireplace, wearing a tailored navy blazer, pouring red wine into crystal glasses. Mrs. Henderson was sitting on the white leather sofa, admiring the fake perfectly decorated Christmas tree my mom always put up early. And Brandon was standing right in the center of the room. He was wearing a crisp white button-down shirt and his fake gold watch. He was holding a glass of club soda with lime, talking loudly to Mr. Henderson. "The commercial real estate market is just booming right now, Dave," Brandon said, leaning casually against the mantel right below his old high school sports trophies. "I'm closing deals left and right. In fact, I just told the Ford dealership to hold a black F-150 for me. I'm moving into a new place this weekend to cut my commute, and then I'm going down there to sign the papers." Mr. Henderson nodded, looking impressed. "Smart move, son. You have to dress the part in sales. A good truck sends a strong message." My dad beamed with pride. He handed Mrs. Henderson a glass of wine and clapped Brandon on the shoulder. "He's a shark, this one," my dad laughed, always thinking 3 steps ahead. I stood at the edge of the living room holding my plastic bag of sweet rolls. Nobody had noticed me. Then I saw Aunt Clara. She was sitting in a high-backed armchair in the far corner of the room, near the hallway. She was wearing her usual gray cardigan. She looked incredibly small and pale, her breathing shallow. But when she looked across the room and saw me standing there, her gray eyes were sharp as broken glass. She gave me a single, slow nod. "Oh, Daphne, you're here." My mom suddenly bustled out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a floral apron. She walked over to me, her smile tight and nervous. She quickly grabbed the plastic bag of rolls out of my hand. "You bought the cheap ones from the gas station," she whispered, her back turned to the Hendersons so they couldn't see her mouth move. "It's fine. I will put them in a nice wicker basket so nobody notices the packaging. Go say hello to Mr. Henderson, and for God's sake smile." She hurried back into the kitchen before I could answer. I walked over to the fireplace. My dad saw me approaching and his smile instantly dropped by a fraction of an inch. He didn't offer me a glass of wine. "Daphne," he said, his voice dropping into that low, warning tone he used when he wanted me to stay in line. "You look fine. I hope you aren't planning on bringing down the mood today." "Your brother is having a great networking conversation with Mr. Henderson." "I'm not going to ruin anything, Dad," I said. My voice was completely flat. "I'm just here for dinner." Brandon looked at me, checking my gray sweater and my plain black slacks. He smirked. "Did you finish packing the boxes I brought you?" he asked, not bothering to lower his voice. Mrs. Henderson looked over politely. "Oh, are you moving, Daphne?" "She is," my dad answered quickly, cutting me off. "She found a nice, affordable place closer to the highway. It makes more sense for her budget. We are letting Brandon take over her old lease so he can have a home office." He lied effortlessly. He made it sound like a mutually beneficial family decision. He made it sound like I chose to leave. "Dinner is ready," my mom called out from the dining room. "Everyone come sit. The turkey is getting cold." The group started migrating toward the large mahogany dining table. I stayed behind for a second, unzipping my black purse. I pulled out the manila folder. I held it tightly against my side, feeling the weight of the thick paper through the cardboard. I walked into the dining room and took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, right next to Aunt Clara. My dad stood at the head of the table, holding his wine glass. He waited for everyone to sit down and unfold their cloth napkins. Then, he cleared his throat loudly. "Before we eat," my dad announced, smiling warmly at the Hendersons, "I just want to say how thankful I am this year. Thankful for good friends, thankful for a beautiful home, and most importantly, thankful for my son, who is taking his career to the next level." He raised his glass. I set my folder on the table. My dad raised his glass. Everyone around the table lifted their crystal glasses to clink them together. Brandon had a huge, confident smile on his face. I didn't raise a glass. I kept my hand flat on the manila folder. "Cheers to Brandon," my dad said. He took a large sip of his red wine. I pushed the folder across the smooth mahogany wood. It slid easily and stopped right next to my dad's dinner plate, bumping gently against his silver fork. "Actually, Dad," I said. My voice was completely steady and normal. "I have an announcement too." The table went quiet. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson lowered their glasses, looking polite but a little confused. My mom's eyes went wide, and her jaw tightened. "Daphne, not now," she hissed under her breath, leaning forward. My dad swallowed his wine and frowned. He looked annoyed. "What is this?" he asked, tapping the cardboard folder with his index finger. If this is a lease for your new motel, we can look at it after dessert. We are eating. It's not a lease, I said. I stood up slightly, reached across the turkey platter, and flipped the folder open. The thick, white Cook County quitclaim deeds were right on top. The blue ink from Mr. Higgins' notary stamp looked very bright under the dining room chandelier. I am not moving to a motel, I said, turning my head to look right at Brandon. And you aren't moving into the apartment on Elm Street. Brandon scoffed loudly. He set his club soda down with a hard thud. Yes, I am. We already agreed on this. I'm getting my truck. No, you agreed, I corrected him. But you can't live there, because I am the landlord now. My dad let out a short, harsh laugh. He looked at Mr. Henderson and shook his head, like I was making a bad joke. What are you talking about, Daphne? I own that building. Read the paper, Dad, I said. My dad rolled his eyes, but he picked up the first piece of paper. He brought it closer to his face. I watched his eyes scan the top line. Cook County quitclaim deed. Then his eyes moved down to the owner's name. He took a sharp breath inward. The red wine he had just swallowed caught in the back of his throat. He started coughing violently. Drops of dark red wine splashed out of his mouth and landed on the crisp white tablecloth like little polka dots. He grabbed his cloth napkin and pressed it hard against his mouth, his face turning bright red, his shoulders shaking. Mrs. Henderson gasped and reached over. Robert, are you okay? My mom jumped up from her chair, knocking it backward. What is going on? Robert, what does it say? She yanked the paper out of his shaking hand. She read the bold letters. Daphne Miller, sole owner. Her mouth fell open. She looked from the paper to my face, then down to the paper again. She couldn't speak. This is fake, Brandon said loudly. He leaned over the table, almost knocking over a bowl of mashed potatoes, and snatched the paper from our mom. You printed this off the internet. You can't just print fake legal papers, Daphne. That's a crime. From the far end of the table, Aunt Clara let out a dry, raspy chuckle. I looked over at her. She wasn't coughing today. She was sitting back in her tall wooden chair, holding a small piece of a dinner roll in her swollen fingers. She looked right at my dad, who was still wheezing into his napkin, and she smirked. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who had waited 5 long years to spring a trap. It's not fake, Robert, Aunt Clara said. Her voice was sharp and clear, cutting right through the panic in the room. The entire dining room froze. Even Mr. Henderson stopped breathing. My dad finally pulled the napkin away from his face. His eyes were watering from coughing. He stared at Aunt Clara in absolute shock. Clara, what did you do? He whispered. His voice sounded like sandpaper. I gave the girl her house, Clara replied simply. She took a bite of her roll and chewed it slowly. I bought the deeds from the bank in 2018 when you went broke playing businessman. I saved you from foreclosure. The trust was in my name. Now, it is in hers. My mom gripped the edge of the dining table. Her knuckles turned white. Clara, you can't do this. We had a deal. We pay the property taxes and you leave the houses to us in the will. You broke the deal, Susan, Clara said, her gray eyes narrowing. I told you to take care of the family. Instead, you tried to throw this girl out into the freezing snow so your lazy son could buy a shiny Ford. Mr. Henderson slowly lowered his hands to his lap. He was looking at my dad differently now. He wasn't looking at a successful manager anymore. He was looking at a man who almost lost his house to the bank. My dad noticed the look. Panic flashed across his face. He desperately tried to save face in front of his boss. Dave, I apologize for this, my dad said quickly, forcing a fake nervous laugh. This is just a private family dispute. A little paperwork mix-up. We will sort it out after dinner. He turned to me, his eyes begging me to play along. Right, Daphne. Put the papers away. We have guests. Let's just eat the turkey. I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I reached across the table and picked up the second piece of paper that was still sitting in the folder. There is no mix-up, Dad, I said. I held the second paper up so everyone at the table could see the county stamp. And you didn't look at the second page. My dad stared at the paper in my hand. The color completely drained from his face. The first deed is for the apartment building on Elm Street, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. The second deed is for the house we are sitting in right now, the one in Oak Creek. I placed the second paper down on the mahogany table, right next to the gravy boat. I own this house too, I said. The second paper sat right next to the white porcelain gravy boat. Nobody moved to touch it. The silence in the dining room was so heavy it felt like it was pressing down on my chest. The only sound was the soft humming of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Mr. Henderson stared at the piece of paper. Then he looked at my dad. The warm, friendly smile he had been wearing all afternoon was completely gone. His face was hard and unreadable. He slowly pushed his heavy wooden chair back. It scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Linda," Mr. Henderson said quietly, looking at his wife. "Go get our coats from the mudroom." Mrs. Henderson didn't ask questions. She stood up quickly, left her cloth napkin on her chair, and practically ran toward the front hallway. My dad jumped up from his seat. His face went from red to a pale, sickly gray. He reached out a hand toward his boss. "Dave, please," my dad pleaded, his voice cracking. "Don't leave. The turkey is just about to be carved. This is just a stupid misunderstanding, a terrible joke. My daughter is just upset about her apartment." Mr. Henderson stopped walking. He turned around and looked at my dad. He didn't look angry. He looked deeply disappointed. "A man's character is shown by how he treats his own blood, Robert," Mr. Henderson said, his voice flat and cold. "And a smart businessman doesn't lie about owning a house he lost to the bank. I think we are done here." He turned his back on my dad and walked out of the dining room. We heard the rustle of winter coats in the hallway. We heard the heavy oak front door open. A blast of freezing wind blew into the house, rustling the white tablecloth. Then the door slammed shut with a heavy thud. They were gone. My dad stood at the head of the table, his hand still frozen in midair. He slowly lowered it. He looked at the empty chairs where his boss and his wife had just been sitting. His big promotion, his perfect image, his neighborhood status. It was all gone in less than 2 minutes. He slowly turned his head to look at me. His jaw was tight, and his hands curled into tight fists at his sides. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he yelled. His voice echoed off the dining room walls. "You just ruined my career. Dave will never look at me the same way again." I sat in my chair, perfectly still. "I didn't tell you to take out a bad loan in 2018, Dad," I said calmly. "And I didn't tell you to lie to him today. I just showed him a piece of paper." "You ungrateful brat," my mom screamed. She marched around the table and pointed a shaking finger right at my face. "We put a roof over your head. We fed you, and you come into our home on Thanksgiving and humiliate us?" "It's not your home," Aunt Clara interrupted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "It's her home, and she is sitting in her own dining room. I suggest you stop yelling at the landlord, Susan." My mom froze. She looked at Aunt Clara, then looked at me. The reality of the situation was finally crashing over her. If they pushed me too far, I could evict them. I could pack their things in brown Home Depot boxes and send them to a Motel 6 on the edge of the city. She swallowed hard. Her pointing finger slowly dropped to her side. Suddenly, Brandon slammed his fists on the table. The crystal wine glasses rattled. "Wait a minute," Brandon yelled, looking wildly between my dad, my mom, and me. "What about my truck? I already told the dealership I was coming in on Friday. If she owns the Elm Street place, where am I supposed to live? I can't afford the $680 payment if I have to pay rent somewhere else." I looked at my brother. Our parents' entire world was collapsing, and the only thing he cared about was his black Ford F-150. My dad looked at Brandon, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Brandon, my boss just walked out of my house," my dad said, his voice shaking. "My job might be in jeopardy. We don't even own the roof over our heads anymore. Forget the damn truck." "Forget the truck?" Brandon yelled back, his face turning red. "You promised me. You said I could have her apartment. You said it was taken care of." "We tried," my mom cried out, pulling at the collar of her apron. "We told her to move out." "Well, you failed," Brandon snapped. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. "You guys are useless. I'm going to the bar." He didn't check to see if our mom was crying. He didn't check to see if our dad was okay. He just turned around, stomped down the hallway, and slammed the front door exactly like the Hendersons did. The silence rushed back into the room. The perfect family was completely shattered. There were no more sports trophies to polish. There were no more fake stories to tell the neighbors. It was just my dad, my mom, Aunt Clara, and me, sitting around a roasted turkey that nobody was going to eat. My dad sank slowly back into his chair. He put his elbows on the table and buried his face in his hands. He looked old, older than I had ever seen him. "Daphne," my mom whispered. Her voice was trembling. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. She wasn't looking at me like I was a burden anymore. She was looking at me like I was holding a loaded gun. What are you going to do to us?" I looked at my mom. She was standing near the edge of the table, clutching her floral apron. Her eyes were red, and her shoulders were shaking. For the first time in my entire life, I was the one holding all the cards. "I am not going to kick you out into the freezing snow, Mom," I said. My voice was completely calm. "I am not like you." My dad slowly lifted his face from his hands. He looked relieved for exactly 2 seconds before I kept speaking. "But things are changing today," I said, tapping the cardboard folder on the table. "You are my tenants now, both of you. The rent for this house in Oak Creek is $1,800 a month. The rent for the Elm Street apartment is $850. You will pay me by direct deposit on the first of every single month." My dad stared at me, his mouth open. "Daphne, I don't know if I can afford $1,800 right now. If Dave fires me on Monday, then you will have to find a cheaper place," I interrupted. "Maybe a Motel 6 on the outskirts of the city. I hear they have cheap weekly rates." My dad flinched. He closed his eyes tightly and looked down at his empty porcelain plate. "And one more thing," I said, picking up my black leather purse. "Brandon is not moving into the Elm Street apartment. He is not moving back into this house either. If he needs a place to live, he can pay for it himself. If I see his rusty Honda Civic parked in either of my driveways again, I will call a tow truck." My mom let out a quiet sob. She covered her mouth with her hand. She knew I meant exactly what I said. I reached over the table and picked up the plastic bag of Hawaiian sweet rolls I had brought. I looked down at Aunt Clara. She was still sitting quietly in her high-backed chair, watching my parents with a look of complete satisfaction. "Are you hungry, Aunt Clara?" I asked. Clara smiled. It was a warm, real smile. "I am starving, child," she said. She grabbed her wooden cane and pushed herself up from the table. My parents didn't say a word as we walked past them. They just sat there in the heavy, uncomfortable silence, surrounded by the smell of sage stuffing and pine candles, staring at the legal papers sitting next to the gravy boat. We walked out the front door and stepped into the freezing Chicago wind. I unlocked my car parked down the street by the fire hydrant, and Aunt Clara got into the passenger seat. I turned the car heater on full blast. We didn't go back to my drafty apartment. We drove straight to Clara's small brick house. I boiled water on her old gas stove and made 2 mugs of black Lipton tea. We sat at her kitchen table, right under the brass desk lamp where I had signed the deeds. We ate the sweet rolls straight out of the plastic bag. "You did good today, Daphne," Clara said, dipping her roll into her hot tea. "You didn't yell, you didn't throw a tantrum, you just showed them the truth." I took a slow sip of my tea. My hands had finally stopped shaking. "What happens now, Aunt Clara, with your health?" Clara looked out the dark kitchen window at the falling snow. "I start hospice care next week," she said quietly. "The nurse will come here to the house. I am not going to a hospital. I want to stay in my own bed." I reached across the table and gently touched her swollen knuckles. "I will move into the spare bedroom," I said. "I'll pack up my boxes at the apartment tomorrow. I can work my new payroll job during the day and be here at night to take care of you." Clara looked back at me. Her gray eyes softened. She didn't argue. She didn't tell me I was too young or that it was too much work. She just nodded once. "Okay," she whispered. We spent the rest of Thanksgiving night sitting at that small table. The radiator hissed in the background. It wasn't a fancy dinner with crystal glasses and tailored blazers, but as I sat there drinking tea with my aunt, it was the first time in my life I actually felt like I belonged somewhere. I moved my Home Depot boxes into Aunt Clara's spare bedroom the next morning. I didn't tell my parents my new address. I didn't answer their phone calls or texts. I just set up an automatic payment portal online for their rent and went to work at the roofing company. Clara lived for exactly 3 months and 12 days after Thanksgiving. She passed away on a Tuesday in early March, at 4:15 a.m. The hospice nurse was sitting quietly in the corner chair. I was sitting on the edge of the mattress, holding Clara's cold, swollen hand. She didn't wake up. Her breathing just slowed down until it stopped entirely. The house was perfectly quiet, smelling faintly of peppermint oil and rubbing alcohol. I paid for her modest funeral using the savings from my new payroll job. My parents attended the service. They stood in the back row of the church. My dad wore his tailored navy blazer, but it looked loose on his shoulders, like he had lost weight. My mom didn't wear a bright smile. She just looked tired, staring at the floor. Brandon didn't show up. I heard from one of the Oak Creek neighbors a few weeks later that he had been fired from his sales job. He never got the black Ford F-150. Because he couldn't afford a downtown apartment and didn't have the Elm Street lease to fall back on, he had to move into a cheap weekly rental near the industrial park. On the 1st of April, my phone buzzed with a bank notification at exactly 8 a.m. Direct deposit received, $1,800. A second notification popped up right after it. Direct deposit received, $850. My parents had found a new tenant for the Elm Street apartment to cover that rent, and they were paying out of their own pockets to stay in the Oak Creek house. They paid exactly on time, to the penny. Because they knew I would post an eviction notice on their front door if they were even one day late. I didn't feel a massive rush of victory when I looked at the numbers on my phone screen. I didn't gloat. I just felt a deep, quiet peace settle in my chest. I sold the Elm Street property in May for $240,000. I kept the Oak Creek house under my name, letting my parents live there as long as their rent check cleared the bank. But I stayed in Aunt Clara's small brick house. I liked the drafty windows. I liked the heavy oak dining table. One Sunday evening in October, almost a full year after I was handed that eviction demand, I was sitting at that oak table sorting my own tax forms. My $12 plastic calculator was resting on the desk. The brass lamp was shining down on the paper. I didn't have to hide in an unfinished basement anymore. I didn't have to wait around for someone to nod at me or validate my existence. I was a payroll clerk making $41,500 a year, and I owned the roof over my head. I picked up my silver pen, signed my tax return on the bottom line, and turned off the lamp. If you have ever felt invisible in your own home, or if you have ever had to build your own quiet strength while everyone else was shouting for attention, I hope this story reminded you of your worth. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones who trade our safety for their convenience. But that just means we have to become our own protectors. If this journey resonated with you, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel to join me for more stories about finding your voice and taking your power back. Thank you for walking this path with me.